All right, so let's look at how we can affect biodiversity, good or bad, what we're doing and what we're doing about it. So with a loss in biodiversity, it's possible that you could get species go extinct. And when species go extinct, which means that there's no more left, then biodiversity is lost. You've lost the operator of that niche. Species that are especially at risk of extinction are those that migrate because they need multiple habitats to be there for them. Those that need large habitats, like our top predators, those that need specialized habitats, think like a koala, it only eats eucalyptus, and those that are of use to humans, because the more we need to use them, the more likely they are to be used up. Certain species are more sensitive to changes than others. There are species that we consider generalists that can live lots of places. They eat a lot of variety of food. They tolerate a wide variety of conditions, things like roaches, mice, raccoons. They adapt to just about anything. But there are species in our world that are very specialist, that have only one type of habitat that they prefer, that can only eat a few types of food, that don't tolerate a wide variety of conditions, whether that's salinity of the ocean or temperature or soil type or food source. And so think like the giant panda, the koala, they're very sensitive to changes because they're specialists. They only do certain things and eat certain things. And when that changes, then they don't make it. Now, specialists exist because they usually have very few competitors for that niche. They occupy a special place and they're very good at it. But when that special niche changes, then those generalists can take over and they're better at adapting to those changes than our specialist species. So certain species are just sensitive to extinctions to begin with. Now, with that, certain extinctions are just bound to happen gradually through time. We've been losing species naturally because of changing conditions since species became a thing on the planet Earth, right? And so we get this natural background extinction rate. Species that we expect to go extinct through time gradually, as things change and they can't compete anymore. But then occasionally you get these mass extinction events where extinction occurs very quickly. It's on a very large scale. It affects many different species, in fact, many different kingdoms. The plants go, the animals go, the bacteria decreases. And so when you have a mass extinction event, it's usually because you had some giant change in environmental conditions. So it's actually happened many times throughout Earth's history. Here's our geologic time scale. The oldest is over there on the left, the Cambrian, and then we're over here in the Quaternary, the most recent. But you notice the width of that line through the middle, the bar width, is the number of living families of species. So your biodiversity will increase through time and then something will happen and your biodiversity will decrease very quickly. You'll have increased biodiversity and then quick extinction event. So if you notice, between the Cretaceous, which is the most recent extinction event, the disappearance of the dinosaurs, remember? Between that and today, we've actually been increasing in biodiversity a good bit. And now scientists are thinking we might be on the verge of another mass extinction event. Now, whether that's natural or caused by humans, a little bit of both, definitely. Who knows? But it is a natural thing to happen, just maybe happening in kind of an unnatural way. So important species that we can look at when we're determining biodiversity and the health of our ecosystem. One is an indicator species. An indicator species provide an early warning of damage to a community or to an ecosystem. You remember the story of the canary in the coal mine? They would take birds down into the coal mine with them, and birds are very sensitive to carbon dioxide or other noxious fumes. And so if you looked over and the canary had died, get out of the coal mine because it's an indicator that something is wrong down there. Well, we don't use them in coal mines anymore, but the same idea applies to some species. If they're not doing well, if they're suffering, that means that something is wrong in our ecosystem. And then keystone species. Some species, even though all species are important and have a role in the ecosystem, some species have a role that extends beyond just what eats them and is eaten by them. And so they can affect the abundance of other species, and the types of species that we have could be pollinators. So if pollinators disappear, then a lot of the plant species are affected, and then the animals that eat them are affected. Or it could be top predators. For instance, the sea otter they found, sea otters are a keystone species. They naturally eat sea urchins. If they disappear like they did a couple of decades ago, then the sea urchins breed and take over. Nothing checks their population, and so they tend to overgraze on their favorite food, kelp. Well, many other animals depend on these kelp forests for protection, for habitat, for food. And so if the kelp is gone, then the whole ecosystem collapses just because of the sea otter disappearance. So we've got different categories that we can put species in when we are concerned about them. Endangered species are likely to become extinct if we don't immediately take protective measures. So when something is placed on the endangered species list, there's usually a plan written about them. We take measures to protect their habitat, to carefully monitor the numbers there. And so it's a lot of work for the people that work on the endangered species list to take care of these species. Threatened, we're concerned about them. There's a declining population. They could become endangered if they're not protected. So this is a species of concern that we're looking at, but it's not quite endangered yet. And then there are some species that may disappear from a particular area, but they still live somewhere else. So think East Texas, the gray wolf. We used to have gray wolves living in East Texas many centuries ago. But as people moved in, the gray wolves moved out. They're extirpated from East Texas, but you can still find gray wolves in Montana, Wyoming. So they still exist, just not here. Okay, they exist in other locations on the planet. So some species in Texas have been extirpated, but you can still find them in other places. So how do humans cause extinctions? What are we doing? Well, in the last 200 years or so, as we've had a huge boom in population, so have the number of threatened species gone up because we are taking over habitat. We're introducing species that shouldn't naturally be there. We are emitting pollution. We're harvesting too much resources to be used by people. And the number one reason that we're losing species is habitat destruction and fragmentation. More humans means more land that's needed for crops, for homes, for the roads that break up the forest. And so habitat loss is estimated to cause about 75% of the extinctions that are now happening. It's a huge number, but it's not that we're going out and killing them, it's that they don't have a place to live. We also lose a bunch of species by introducing exotic species, things that don't naturally grow there, that tend to outcompete them. So if a species doesn't have natural defense against this introduced species, or if it can't compete with it for resources, then it can take over and become what we call invasive. Invasive species spread rapidly. They spread very easily. They don't have competition. They don't have predators. And so they take over just completely unchecked in their new home. So fire ants, Chinese privet, they all tend to be generalist species that can survive in many places with many types of conditions. And so they can go into a new habitat and just reproduce without abandon. And then, of course, there's the hunting, the harvesting, the poaching. Lots of species are endangered because they've been used by people. Now, we have a lot of international agreements between countries to regulate the hunting, the poaching, the fishing, the hunting, the fishing, the harvesting, the trading. And if they do that illegally, it's called poaching. So a lot of countries will get together and say, okay, you can have, 2 of these mountain goats when you're hunting, and that's it. Because we have this many hunters, we have this big of a population, and so they'll set those hunting limits or the harvesting limits based off of the species richness, the species data. And there's lots of wildlife biologists that will catalog populations and count numbers of individuals to see what those limits could be. Here in Texas, we will do white-tailed deer surveys every year, and based on the health of the population of white-tailed deer, that's how you get your bag limits or fishing limits. How many bass can you catch when you're out fishing? That's dependent upon how the bass population is doing. So pollutants that humans use can make their way into food webs and cause problems. Pesticides, cleaning products, if they get into the food web, then our predators that are vulnerable to that eat a lot of things that have a little bit of pollution that kind of magnifies, and suddenly they've got a lot of pollution in their system. So pollution can also cause problems with species being threatened and endangered. So there are some areas where we consider that biodiversity to be really critical. They have greater diversity in that area than others. So there are certain species called endemic species that are only found in a limited area. And those endemic species, if that area is destroyed, then they no longer have a home. Tropical rainforest, coral reefs are two examples of areas that have a lot of endemic species. They only occupy about 7% of our land area, but over half the world's species call the tropical rainforest home. Islands also are areas of critical biodiversity because a lot of species that are adapted to that island. They're very distinct there. They've speciated once they got to that island, and then that's the only place that they're found, like Hawaii. There's some plants and animals that are found on Hawaii that aren't found anywhere else in the world because many, many centuries ago they found their way there and then have speciated. Remember our types of speciation. They've speciated because of that difference in area. So there's certain areas that are biodiversity hotspots that we are especially concerned about. These are areas with high numbers of endemic species, and they're also highly threatened by people. So you notice our rainforest, the oceans, the coral reefs are definitely diversity hotspots. So what can we do? I hate to leave you with something sad. Let's look at something happy. What can we do? So to save species, we have lots of different things that we can do. One that you may notice when you go to the zoo is a captive breeding program. They are protecting and breeding a species with the hope of reintroducing the species into its natural habitat sometime. They can also preserve the genetic material, so seeds and eggs and pure DNA that they can later use to increase the number of the species. Zoos, aquariums, parks, they protect it from predators. They give it plenty of food, so all it has to do is just sit there and survive. And then even though these are good, they are supposed to be a last resort because those small populations, like we talked about with the population bottleneck, they're very vulnerable to disease and genetic disorders. So you want to save these captive breeding programs as a last resort there. The best way to preserve our species is to preserve their habitats. That's the best thing. Managing large areas, protecting the ecosystem, then that's the best way to preserve the species that are within that habitat. So there's a couple of questions like how much land is enough? You don't want just about 10 acres if the lion is going to need 200 acres. And then how much fragmentation? Could you have roads through there for people to see it? Or do you need it to be completely undisturbed? There's also legal protection. For instance, in 1973, we passed the Endangered Species Act. That says that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has to compile a list. Anyone who harms these species on this list is fined. Any federal government projects that jeopardize a species or their habitat can't happen. And then there has to be a plan for how to recover this species. It could be a habitat conservation plan that then allows for the species to be conserved. Now, internationally, we've also had a lot of cooperation. The IUCN is made up of 200 different government agencies and private organizations, and they all got together and made an international treaty we called CITES, the Conservation on International Trade in Endangered Species. So you might have heard if you have elephant tusks or ivory, and they trade that, across country lines, country borders, that's illegal, and that can get you in a lot of trouble, lots of fines. Then you've got different Earth summits, different biodiversity treaties that happen that get together and decide how we're going to protect our endangered species. So there are things being done. It's getting better, but of course our habitat management is number one. So organizations like the World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy just buys up land. They're buying land and protecting it. Conservation International, you might have heard Greenpeace, all of those organizations are working together to hopefully preserve our species and our biodiversity. Okay? All right, you are done with our section.